Hey, what's going on everybody? Welcome to this tutorial where I'm going to be demonstrating how to add in authentication into a React application using React Router 6. So we're going to take care of all the key components of authentication, everything from logging a user in, registering a user, logging them out, and also making sure that we have routes that are protected from users that are not authenticated. So we're going to build all this into a minimalist application. We're just going to be focusing on the authentication process, and we're also going to have a backend, which I'm about to introduce for this video. So let's go ahead and demo the application before we get started. This is our minimalist app. So I actually have some boilerplate template code set up for you, so we don't have to build out the template itself. But this is our application. We have a register page, so a user can register. Users can also log in. And if we try to access a page that is supposed to be protected, like our home page, we're automatically redirected to this login page and prompted to log in. Now, when we log in, we're going to see this home page and a profile page. So you'll notice a navigation bar changes here, and we can log users out. So for the backend part of this application, we're going to be using one of my new favorite platforms to work with called Appwrite, which is going to make authentication incredibly easy to set up. So if you haven't heard of Appwrite yet, it comes onto the market as an open source alternative to something like Firebase. So it's a backend as a service platform, and it's incredibly easy to use and fun to work with. So with Appwrite, we have two options in how we can get started with it. We can set up a local instance of Appwrite, and then that leaves it up to us on how we deploy our application. It gives us full control over that, or we can use something called the Appwrite Cloud. So what we're going to do is use the Appwrite Cloud, which is in a sense gives us like a console where we can set up a full backend, manage our users, all of this within the Appwrite Cloud. That just takes a couple of minutes to set up. So we're going to be using that for this tutorial just to simplify things. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the repo for this project. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and link this up down in the video description. I'll need you to clone it because we're going to go ahead and work with the template for this application and build on top of that. So we're going to clone it and start building within it. Now, in this repo, you want to go ahead and start with the starter template. So we have two main projects in here. We have the final code, which is what we're going to build out right now. So this will be that end project that you can review and check the code. And this will be the starter template. So we're going to clone this entire repo, pull out this specific folder, and start building within it. Now, I didn't do too much in there. I just added those pages that I showed you with no functionality. Everything else we're going to build out from scratch. So we just have that template code and some styling. Now, within this, you're also going to find these video notes that are going to be very helpful for you, and I'm actually going to be following this within the tutorial. So this is like a written version of this tutorial. So what I did here is I laid out the entire tutorial and the process, and we also have the snippets of source code that we're going to be adding into this project step by step. So if we look here, if we go back into this section right here, we're going to start by adding in private routes. We'll add in the AuthContext, so we're going to use the context API to lift up our state and just wrap our components so we can access the user and the current auth status. Then we'll build in that login functionality along with persisting a user so they can remain logged in when a page is refreshed, log out, and then registration. So this is the entire tutorial that we're going to follow along with. So let's go ahead and clone this. Again, this is linked up in the video description, so don't follow this link directly. If for some reason I happen to change the link, the most recent link will be in the video description. So let's go ahead and open up VS Code. I'm going to open up an instance of it, and we're just going to go ahead and clone this project and get this set up. So I'm going to go ahead and CD into my desktop. So whether you're using the terminal on a Mac or Windows machine, go ahead and just set up whatever you need to clone your project. And let's just go ahead and do this. So we'll CD into my desktop and we'll do git clone. And we're going to clone this repo. So I'm going to paste in that entire URL. And this will set up our project. So what I'm going to do here is before we open this project up is I'm just going to drag this into a frame here. And I just want to extract the starter template. So we're just going to bring that out here. And I can close this out. And that's the only thing I want to open up. I just want to make sure we're not confusing any of that other code with this. So now I can just go ahead and open that up. So we'll just go into my desktop, open up one starter template. This will be my project. So this is what you should be working within. And let's review the code. So actually, before we do that, let's just go ahead and just run npm install just to make sure we get the proper installation set up with this. Instead of create React app, I'm actually using something called Vite or Vite, depending on how you want to say it. So that's going to be very easy to work with. I'll actually just make sure we start up our server, and I'll explain the difference between npm run dev or npm start. Well, I guess that is a difference, so there's not much to explain, but let's go ahead and review the code. So in here, we have our index.css file. So this is just going to be the styling that we're going to work with. I guess I can stay pretty zoomed in here. So this is the styling for our application. We just have basic styling, not too much. We have a container, some styling for our header, our buttons, and our form input, and that's it. So there's no need to actually get into that, but the code we'll want to pay attention to is going to be the homepage. So it's just an empty homepage, nothing to it. We just have some text and the class of container, so you can even build this out from scratch if you wanted. Then we have our profile page, same thing, just a very simple arrow function component, and then our register page. So the register page here simply just has the form template. So we simply have a container for the entire page. We have a container for the form itself. And then we just have our two input fields, which are wrapped inside of this wrapper with a label. So we have the email field, the password field, and then the input button, along with a link to the register page. Now, within the register page, same thing. We just have a form with a container. And then our 4 fields, we have the name, we have the email field, the password field, and then password confirmation field, along with a submit button. And then we have a component for our header. So the only thing I did here was just add a function for the logout click button. So in this template, we can just kind of navigate between the pages. So we just have a very simple header here set up, and that's it. So let's go ahead and just run our server. So we'll clear this, and we'll just run npm run dev. So once you run npm install, you should have access to this, and this will open up our application on port 5173. So let's go ahead and do that. I have a shortcut saved right here, so I can actually just click on this, and this is our application. So we can click log out. That'll just take us to a page, or our page, and it won't actually log us out. It'll just navigate to that page, and we have our profile and our home page. And one thing to note is we do have React Router DOM already installed. This is React Router version 6, and you can look at the package.js file for that. Okay, so let's go ahead and set up our Appwrite application. So that's what we want to do. So what we'll do is we'll go into appwrite.io. This is Appwrite right here. This is the console that we're going to be working with. And this is all that functionality that we get with it. So there's quite a bit. We get a real-time database. We get storage for file storage, databases, authentication, and so on. So go ahead and register for an account in an Appwrite Cloud. We'll go ahead and do sign in. I'm already signed in, so you'll want to create an account. And I have a demo project here. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and create a new project, and we're going to call this React Auth. So this is going to take a few minutes. And one thing you'll notice is we do have a project ID. So this will automatically be generated for you, and we are going to need this in a minute here. So let's go ahead and just leave it alone. It'll generate an ID for us, and we'll get back to it. So we have our project here. And within our project, we need to specify what platform we want to work with. So we're going to work with the Web SDK. We also have Flutter, Android, Apple. So there's a lot we can do here. We're just going to focus on a web app. So we're just going to go ahead and call this React Auth app. So we're going to create our application. And for the host name, this is going to be the host of where you're accessing the app from. So we're going to access this from localhost here. So we don't need to add the port number. So we'll just do localhost. Let's go ahead and click next. And the next step here is to go ahead and install Appwrite. So let's go ahead and just copy this, and let's open up our application, and I'll just open up another terminal here, and we'll just run this installation. So it's npm install Appwrite, and that'll get this set up for us. So now we have Appwrite installed, and what I want to do is go ahead and just add this configuration in here. So we want to import the Appwrite client before we configure our app. So what I'm going to do is copy this, and we're just going to go back into our source folder, and let's just go ahead and create a file called Appwrite config with a capital C. So Appwrite config.js, and this will store all the configuration for our Appwrite project. So let's go ahead and paste that, and then we'll go to the next step. So we're almost there. So from here, and I just realized there's a next button here, so let me make sure that my screen or my face isn't blocking anything. So give me a second. We'll just move myself to this side, and let's go to the next step. So there's this next button. That's what I clicked from here. So if we go back, and then next. Okay, so at this point, what we're going to do is go ahead and just copy all of this. This is going to go ahead and initiate the client object, and this is going to be the access point to our Appwrite project. So here we're going to see this endpoint, and then we're going to see our project ID. So I guess we didn't have to grab that from our project. It already automatically adds it for us. So we're going to copy this, and let's go ahead and bring this in here. And what I want to do is export this client. So we're going to do export default client, because we are going to need to access this. And if you go into the instructions here, let's go into our notes, and I'll actually reference this. Let's go ahead and continue this process. But what I want to do is actually import account, because we are going to be accessing the user accounts, and we're just going to go ahead and export account itself. So we'll just go ahead and copy this, and we'll just add in account, and let's do a named export for account here. So this is how we're going to authenticate, register, and so on with our users. Okay, so that's all we need for the Appwrite configuration. So let's go back into our console, and let's just go ahead and hit next. Take me to my dashboard, and this is my dashboard with all the stats. So we see we have a database, our custom functions, our storage, and our authentication. So all I want to do here, we're not going to worry about setting up a database in this project. I actually did just come out with a full tutorial on how to create a real-time messaging application on the Traversy Media YouTube channel, so I'll link that up too. So if you want to handle CRUD operations and kind of learn all that, that's going to be in that tutorial. We won't focus on that database right now. So in here, let's just go ahead and go to auth, and let's create a user. So we'll just go ahead and create a user named Dennis, and we'll just do dennis@dennisiv.com, and we just need one demo user to register with. So password 123, that'll be my secure password, and we'll go ahead and create that. And now we have a user within our console. So we see this one user, and we're ready to move on from here. So that's all we had to do with our Appwrite project. So let's go ahead and go to our notes here, our video notes. And the last step here was to create that user. So we just completed that. So we did steps 1 through 6, got that set up. And let's go ahead and create our private route. So what we're going to do here is go ahead and create a route that's going to protect certain pages within our routes here inside of app.js. So we can close out our header, we'll close out Appwrite config. And what we need to do here is just go ahead and wrap these components, so the home page and the profile page, we just want to make sure those are wrapped within a private route. So let's go ahead and create that component, so that way users can't just enter those pages. Like I showed you before, we can just go to the home page. We're not logged in, but anybody can access this. So we need to stop that. So what I'm going to do here is just go ahead and create a folder called utils, and we'll put in that project in there. And is that what I called it in the demo? Let's just make sure real quick. So yes, it's in utils, or we're going to call it private routes.jsx. So new file, utils for utilities, and then / private routes.jsx. And let's go ahead and create this component. So the first thing we will want to do is go ahead and make an import. So we'll import outlet from React Router DOM and navigate. And I'll explain what's happening here in a second. So let's go ahead and make sure that's from React Router DOM. We'll generate the component, which we will call private routes. Make that an arrow function component, and we'll just export it. So export default private routes, and we'll add the logic in here. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to create this private routes component that's going to be a parent route to a bunch of child routes. And what's going to happen is we're going to add in some logic, and once we check like the auth status or anything else that we need to check, if everything goes correctly, we're going to pass the user on to the child routes, which will be profile and home, and then in the future, whatever pages you want. If it doesn't check out, we're going to use navigate to redirect this user. So let's go ahead and do this. At this point, until we actually create some authentication here, let's go ahead and just create a variable, and this will be representing our user. So we'll just say user is equal to false. Later on, this will actually be an object, but we're going to set this to true or false just to see how this works. Now, to return these values, we're just going to go ahead and do return, and we're going to check with a ternary operator. We're going to say if we have a user, so in this case, if user is true, let's go ahead and use the outlet component, which lets us go ahead and send the traffic down to the child components. We're going to go ahead and pass along the traffic. We basically say, hey, if we have a user, continue on to these child components. If not, so if this doesn't check out, what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and use the navigate component, and we're going to say, hey, this user is not authenticated, so go ahead and send this user to the login page. And we'll see this in action, so it's going to make a little bit more sense once you see it. So very simple logic. We check the user status, and we return either the child routes or we redirect our user. So outlet and navigate, and you can look up outlet in the React Router DOM documentation if you want to understand that a little bit better. So now with an app, what we can do is we can just go ahead and import this component. So let's just do import private routes from utils private routes. We just had the import get added. And we're just going to go ahead and bring this in here. And again, this is all within your notes. So if you want to check the code inside of that notes file, you can do that. So we'll just do route. So we're going to create a new route here. And we'll just go ahead and wrap all these child routes. And let's make this indented here. And for the element here, we're just going to say, let's go ahead and pass in the private routes. So private routes will be the parent to all these child routes here. Or child routes, yes, that was correct. Okay, so we simply wrapped it. What's going to happen is when we enter one of these URLs, we're first going to go through this component. If everything checks out, we'll pass on whatever page we're trying to access. So let's save both of these and let's just check this out. So let's go to our page here and we'll open this project up and let's try to go to the home page. So if I click on it, it's not working. It's just redirecting me back to this page. Now, if I go to this private route and I set this to true, let's just say this is going to represent the user object. If we try to go to the home page and profile page, now we can. So those two pages are protected. Right now we're on the home page. If we actually go ahead and minimize our screen, let's go ahead and do that. If I can actually get this working correctly, give me 1 second. So when we change that status, it's going to redirect this user. So if we set this to false, we're going to see that automatically get redirected to the home page. Okay, so that was all we had to do for this section. That is how you create a private route. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create some auth context. We want to lift up our state because I don't want to get the user from this route. I would rather have a user sitting somewhere in a global state, and then we'll pull that state down into this component, and then we can use that later on in our header. So for example, inside of our header component, we want to make sure that these links don't show if we're not authenticated, because we don't want a user going to those pages, and we want this button to say log in instead of log out. So that's what that state is going to do. So again, inside of this guide here, go down to this section into the auth context, and this is what we're going to create. So we're just going to create some boilerplate functions. We're going to set everything up, pass this state down, create a custom hook, and then we'll start using it. Okay, so let's go back in here, and inside of utils, we're going to go ahead and create AuthContext.jsx, and let's start building this out. So we want to make an import. So we want to, first of all, use context. So we'll do use context. We'll want to bring in use state. At some point, we want to use the state, and we want to use effect. So that's all from React, and I'll just go ahead and bring this in so I can see more. First, we'll create the auth context itself. So auth context. And this is going to be using create context. And we also need to import that. So we have use context and auth context. I was actually meaning to import this one in first, but we're going to need both. And then we're just going to go ahead and create the provider. So let's just do export default, and we're going to export the auth context by default right away. And then for the auth provider, this will be just a named export. So we're going to do export const auth provider. And let's go ahead and just take the children from here. So we'll just do children, clean up the component itself. And for the return value, we're just going to do auth context dot provider. So the provider will be in here, and this is how we're going to make this entire provider component. And we just need to pass in the value here. So we'll just do value, which will be an object. And in here, we're going to pass in the context data. So everything, all the state that we want to pass down, we'll just put into this context data. So we'll do context data, and this will just be an object with the state that we pass down. So we can throw this in here. Now, inside of the auth provider, what we want to do is first of all set a state. So we don't want to render any children until the component is finished loading, because we don't want to actually accidentally render the home page or a page that should be protected until we've checked if that user is actually in our application. So let's go ahead and just do const. We'll first get the loading state and set loading. And this will be use state. And by default, loading will be true. So when we first open this up, we want to make sure that we are in a loading state so we don't accidentally render something. Then we'll just do user and then set user. And we'll just do use state. And at this point, we can just do null. So we'll just set null for the user. And we can pass in the user into the context data, first of all, so we can take care of that. And then in here, let's just check the loading state. So if we are loading, and loading should actually be true, so we actually want to be in the loading state, so that should be true, not false. So if we're loading, typically you'd want to add in some kind of load spinner, but for now we're just going to add in a paragraph text, and we'll just say loading make it look somewhat realistic. And let's just close out this paragraph tag. And then if we are not loading, let's go ahead and do the else statement. We'll just render the children. So all the child components. And it looks like we're missing the return statement. So we'll just add that. Make sure to wrap all this so we don't get that error. Okay, there we go. Just fix this indentation. Okay, so next what I want to do is just get that login, logout, register, and check status function to just kind of set up the boilerplate so we can actually pass those down later. So for now, let's just go ahead and do const login user, and this will take care of all the logic for the login functionality. We won't add anything here, but let's go ahead and just pass that down through the context data. We'll use this later on in the login form, and then we just want to do const logout user. And these two methods, well, this one right here will actually take in user info, so we just want to make sure to pass that through. Logout user won't need anything, but we also do need register user. So from that form, we're going to pass in the actual user info. So for login and register, so user info. And later on, to persist a user, we're going to also make sure we have this check status function. Now you can do this in multiple ways, but I just want to name it check user status. I think this is good enough to work with. So we'll just go ahead and throw this in here. So we have these functions here, and we can pass in logout, which will be accessed in the header bar, and then register user, and check user status will just remain up here. And it looks like I spelled register user incorrectly. So there's a G there. We don't need that. And one of the final things that we need to add to this auth provider is we just need to go ahead and call useEffect, because if we pass this information down later, loading is going to be set to true, which means that we're just going to have this loading paragraph tag in our template, and that's all we're going to see. So on load, we just want to go ahead and replicate like the user being fetched here. So we'll just go ahead and add in a useEffect. So we'll just do useEffect. Let's go ahead and create that. And we only want to call it on the initial load. So we'll add in an empty dependency array, and we're just going to set loading to false. So we'll change this later, but for now, this is going to go ahead and update that state. So we'll set that to false. And let's go ahead and actually just create a custom hook to use this provider. So before we actually do that, let's go ahead and actually provide it through the app component, and that's going to be just under router. So we'll just bring this in. We'll just import auth provider. Let's go ahead and pass it above all the components that we want to have access to the provider data at. So we want it in the header and all these child components, and then we can close it down here. So auth provider, and let's go ahead and indent that. Okay, so this data is now accessible through all the child components. Now, instead of using this use context method, I think there's a cleaner way to do that. What I'm going to do is just go ahead and create a custom hook, and we're just going to access that hook. So I'm just going to go ahead and export that, and we're going to call this const use auth. So it's going to use all these authentication mechanisms. So it's going to have this user, it's going to have login, logout, and register user inside of this use auth hook here. So we're just going to go ahead and create that. We'll create that function, and we'll just return use context. So that's why we wanted to use it, and we're going to use the auth context. Okay, so this right here is going to allow us to use this, and it's going to be a lot easier. So the first place I want to test this is going to be inside of that, let's see, that private route. So instead of this just being user true, let's go ahead and import this. So what we're going to do is we're going to do use auth. So we're going to import use auth, and it's going to automatically import that from AuthContext. And now we're going to have access to the user by destructuring that. So we're just going to go ahead and add in the curly braces. So now this gives us access to this user, which is currently null. So this will act just like false will. So now what I can do is if I go ahead and use this same auth provider inside of my login state, because I want to show you something, and this is why I'm going to do this right now. Let's go into my login form, and let's not allow a user to be here unless they are logged out. So we're going to add in useEffect really quick. So the useEffect, we'll bring that in, and let's bring in our auth status. So this is the beauty of the context API, is now I can use the user in here, and we'll just do use auth, and that should automatically import that. So make sure that happens for you. And then let's just go ahead and write useEffect, and we're gonna say if the current user exists, let's just redirect them. So just an empty dependency array, and we want to import use navigate. So we'll need to bring this in. So just a little bit of boilerplate, but we'll get this done real quick. Navigate, use navigate, and that'll allow us to redirect our user. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say if we have a user, and that's going to be an object. So if user, then let's go ahead and we'll just do navigate, and let's just send the user to the home page. Okay, so we have this in the login page, so we can't be here if we're logged out, or if we're logged in, and we can't access any pages down here if we're logged out. So now what I can do is I can just go ahead and bring that other page in side by side. So let's go ahead and minimize this. Okay, and I can go back to my auth provider from here, and let's just change this status. So if we set this to true, we're logged in, it'll redirect us back to the home page, and if we set this to false, we log out and we can't access any of the other pages. Okay, awesome. Well, let's do the same in the header bar now. Let's go ahead and add in some logic here. So we just want to make sure that those nav links are not showing up unless we are logged in. So we'll go back into the header bar. Let's just add in the same functionality. We'll go into components, header, we'll import use auth here, or the user, and use auth. For some reason it didn't import it, so just import use auth. Here we go. And we can just check this right here. So we're just going to wrap this, and we're going to say if the user, and we'll add in certain logic, and then if not, if we don't have a user, then we'll add in the logout button. Okay, so if user, then we want to show the logout button. So let's wrap everything within that fragment there. We'll bring that in, and then we'll just take this login link that we have commented out, and we'll just bring this into the else statement. And I just realized I did this wrong, so this functionality should be up here in the first condition. And we'll just fix this indentation. Okay, just indent that. So if we have a user, go ahead and show the home and the profile page. If we don't have the user, then go ahead and show the login page. So let's go ahead and try that. Minimize this again. We'll go back to our AuthContext, and here we go. So we see the login page, or the login button. And if we set the user to true, now the header bar shows home and profile. Perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next step. We'll just make sure to make everything full screen again, and let's take a look at what we have here. So down here we have the auth context. We just did this. We just set up the auth provider. We set up the user inside of the private routes. We have the header, and the next step is to actually log in a user. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and process the login form and make sure that the form itself takes care of all the getting of the data, like the user email and password, and we're going to let all the actual functionality be processed by the login user function from the auth context. So we're going to use ref here. We're going to set a reference to the form itself. Then we're going to go ahead and add in this handle submit function that's going to be attached to our login form. So we're going to have to add both of those to the form. Once we complete this, then the login process can continue from this function. So we're just going to pass in that data in here. So let's go ahead and jump back to that form, and let's just import use ref. And there's different ways of actually processing this form. In other tutorials, I will use state and then just update that state as we're typing into the form. There's multiple ways of doing it. So for now, we'll just stick to this one. So let's create a reference to this form. So we're going to go ahead and call this login form, and we're going to call use ref here. And the value here will be null to start. Then we can set the reference here. So we'll go down to the form itself. We'll do ref, and that'll allow us to have the reference to the actual HTML element. And we'll just do handle login. So we're just going to go ahead and bring that in. Const handle submit. We'll call it handle submit instead of handle login. So submit. And let's go ahead and process this. So first thing we want to do is when we submit the form, we want to go ahead and just prevent the default value. So e.prevent default. And let's just add in this form or the submit function on here. So on submit, I'm going to go ahead and process that. So we have the submit form and the ref. And here, let's go ahead and just get the reference to the email and password. So we'll do const email, and that's going to be equal to login form. So we have the reference to it, and we can do .current .email. So we'll get the current email .value. And then we want to do the same for the password. So password is equal to login form .current .password .value. Finger just started to mess up a lot here. Okay, so we should have the email and password on submit, and then what do we want to do here? Well, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and just throw this into an object. We'll just call it user info. Bring in user info. We'll throw in the email and password. We'll bring that in here, and then we just call the login user function. So inside of useAuth, we pass down this login user function. We get that information, pass it through the context data, which means that we can simply destructure that. So we'll just do login user, not login form, but login user. And then we can call this method right here. So let's go ahead and just call it. We'll pass in the user info. Okay, so that should be it for this form. Now, the rest of the logic should happen inside of here. So inside of login user, we need to go ahead and process this. And inside of Appwrite config, I earlier set up this account here. So we imported the account and we created an instance of it with our client. So we need to have access to this based on the documentation from Appwrite to actually log in a user. So we're accessing an instance of that account object. So let's go ahead and import that inside of our AuthContext. Let's bring that in. So import account from Appwrite config. So we have that, and we can jump into the login user function. And this function is what's going to process everything from now on. So once we submit it, we're going to pass the data in here into user info and then create that session. So first thing is we'll go ahead and set loading to true. So as we start this process, loading will be true. So we want to make sure we're not rendering anything else out. And then we're going to set loading to false after everything happens in between. So in between here, let's go ahead and add in a try catch statement. So we'll do try catch, and we'll take the error, and we'll just go ahead and do console.error. So we just want to make sure that we can see that if we have an error. And in here, this is where we can use this account object instance here. So let's go ahead and make this an async function first of all. So that's important for how we're going to do this. And then we'll just get the response. So this response right here is going to be a response to the account.create email session method. So create email session. And this function right here, what it's going to do is it's just going to go ahead and take the user info.email and then user info password, and it's going to try to create a session for us. And that'll be stored on the backend here. So we'll do .password. Okay, so we're going to get this session, but this doesn't complete the login process. So first of all, let's just see what this response looks like. So we'll do console.log, and we'll just do session. And let's just check that response. We also haven't checked that login form. So before we get too ahead of ourselves and then create some error, we want to make sure that this login form is also running correctly. So this user info calls this method, and let's try this. Okay, so let's go ahead and refresh this. And let's just try to log in our user. So Dennis at DennisIV.com, and then we'll do password 123. Let's hit login. So it's loading. And it looks like everything went correctly. So we're not logged in yet. We haven't finished that process. We're still on this page. But what we did get back is we got back this session right here. So this is that session object. Let me try to zoom in. I also want to just double check my recorder so I can actually see this. Okay, so we have this session object that gives me this information about the current user session. So it tells me where I'm logged in from and all this information, but what it doesn't give me is it doesn't give me access to the entire user. So after we create the user session, I'm still technically not logged in. So I want to go ahead and actually get a user now, that current user that we have a session to, and then I want to go ahead and set that in the state. So once we log in, we get the response. This is the session. Then let's go ahead and do let account detail. So we actually want to get this user detail, and we'll just call await account.get. So once we have a session, we can just call account.get, and then this right here, we'll change this to account, will actually give us the user information. Now, once we have that information, we can just go ahead and say, okay, we have it. Let's go ahead and set the user. So set user, and we'll pass in account details, and that will log us in. So we still want to work on persisting the user, but let's just see what this looks like and make sure that it actually logs in our user successfully. So now we can just go ahead and inspect. We're on the login page. We're not authenticated. We don't have a user right now. Let's go ahead and just type in password 123, log in, loading. All right, we're in, and look at that. We're on the home page. So it clearly is working. And then if we look here, we actually see our account details. We see the user ID. We see when this user was created, the email, all this information about this specific user. So perfect, we're in here. Now, the only issue right now is we actually have a session, and this session by default, if you go to the Appwrite console, I believe lasts for 365 days. So there's different ways of logging in, but if we go in here, a session lasts 365 days, and we can actually update this and limit the amount of sessions per user. But the issue is when I refresh it, look at that, I'm back in the login page. I can still go through this process again, and it looks like the password was off. That's because it's auto-filling a different password, but I'm not in the page even though I have a session. So let's just go ahead and persist the user. So on load, this is still null. So every time we refresh it, we don't call login, so this value is null. So let's go ahead and update the check user status method. So in here, we just want to go ahead and check the current user as we load the page. So this needs to be called on useEffect here. So we want to check the user status. Then let's get set loading. Let's remove it. And we'll put this at the bottom of this function. So if everything goes well, we want to change that status. Now in here, we're just going to run try. We're going to do a try catch here. I'll do catch, and then we'll just throw in an error. I won't worry about consoling this out right now. Let's just go ahead and complete this. But in here, inside of the try, or inside of the try, let's just go ahead and get the account details, and we'll just do await account dot get. So it's going to use the current session that I have, and it's going to try to get the account. We need to make sure this is an async function. And then once we get that, we're just going to do set user, and then we'll pass in the account details. So look, when I save this, it's actually going to redirect us, or it should redirect us back to the home page. Here we go. So now I can go to the home page, I can go to the profile page, I can try to go to the login page, and it won't let me. And then I can try doing Control-Shift-R, do a hard refresh. I'm still logged in until I actually log this user out. So now let's go ahead and take care of logging a user out. So this is going to be very easy actually. To log a user out, we'll go to the logout function. And this is going to be as simple as adding in account.delete session. And what session do we want to delete? Well, we're going to delete the current session. That's all we're going to do. And then we'll set user to null. Now, in order to call this function, we're just going to go ahead and go into our header. We'll bring in logout user. And let's just get rid of this logout click. I don't need this anymore, and I don't even need to redirect our user because our AuthContext will take care of that. We don't need that function. Let's just go ahead and take logout user and replace this with login, or the logout click button. So we're going to change that. So now let's just try it. Let's just go ahead and refresh it. We're still logged in. I can log out, brings me back here. We'll just do password 123, log in. Let's just go ahead and actually save this password. And now we're in. Let's try it again, log out and log in. There we go. So we can now log in and log out a user along with persisting a user. You see how easy that is? I've done this with other platforms and it's been quite a challenge. So I love how simple that actually makes it. So let's actually jump into registering a user. So we're going to finish this tutorial up here in a minute. So we just completed all of this. And what we want to do is go ahead and register a user. So with register, we're going to have to do the same thing. We're going to need to go to that form. We're first of all going to import the register user function from useauth, useauth, that hook. And then we're just going to go ahead and set the ref to the form. We're going to go ahead and process the actual handle submit method for that form, make sure our passwords match, and then we're going to let the register user function take care of the rest. So let's just start this build process. Let's go ahead and close out our header. We don't need that. We don't need app.js. And I'll just leave login maybe just as a reference. So in here, let's go ahead and bring in useRef. So we'll do useRef. We'll set the reference here, const, and this will be register form, useRef, and we'll set that to null. And I need to make sure that this is a capital R. So useRef, and then I can set this on the form. Let's create some spacing here so I can identify that easier. And we'll just do ref is equal to register form. Okay, so let's bring in the onSubmit method. OnSubmit, let's just do handle, and we'll create this function in a second, but we'll do handle submit, and then we can create this function right here. So we'll just do const handle submit. Let's go ahead and add in the default logic into it. We want to prevent the default. So e.prevent default. And in here, we're just going to go ahead and get the name, which is going to be register form. So we're going to access all the values in the register form. So register form.current.name, and we're going to do value. So we want to get the value of that form. And let's just make sure we have that. So that's name, email, password 1, password 2, and that looks good. Okay, so we're just going to duplicate this a few times for email, password 1, password 2. So let's get the email of this user, password 1, and then password 2. This part's a little bit tedious. Password 2. Okay, so we also need to bring in the register function, or the register user function. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll do register user from use auth, and let's just make sure that import occurred. So if it doesn't automatically import, make sure to type that in. So we have the register user function, and from here, we first want to check if our passwords match. So we're going to go ahead and check password 1 and 2, and if they don't match, we're just going to return nothing. So we're going to just we're going to send an alert. So return, and we'll return nothing here. And we're just going to go ahead and do if password 1 is not equal to password 2, then we're not going to worry about the details of how this looks. We're just going to just use the alert method, and we'll just say passwords do not match. So let's test this before we continue. Okay, we're just going to yell at that user. So we'll just do 1 exclamation point, handle submit, gets this information, and then says passwords do not match. All right, and then we have the onSubmit method. So let's go back in here and let's log out our user, and we're going to register a new user. We'll just say James Bond for the username. James Bob. Actually, I like James Bob way better. So let's just do that. This will be james@email.com, and then we'll just do password and then some random characters here. Let's try to log in. And here we go. We're being yelled at. It says passwords do not match. I know that text is pretty small, but it does say it right there. So that's working exactly how we want it. So after that, if everything checks out, we're just going to go ahead and get the user info, and we're going to pass this into the register form. So we'll do user info, not ingo, but user info. And we're just going to do name, email, password 1, and password 1, and then password 2. And then we can call register user, and we're passing in that user info. Okay, so we're halfway there. Now what we need to do is go ahead and actually build out this register user function. So let's go ahead and go to the next step. We'll jump into AuthContext, and here we go. We have the register user function, and by default, let's just go ahead and make it an async function right now. We get the user information, so that's everything that we need. As we're registering this user, we want to set loading to true, so we are loading as we submit this button, and then when we're done, we want to set loading to false, and we'll just run the try catch here. Try, whoops, catch error, and we do want to console this error out right now, so we'll just do console.error, and we'll just get the error itself. Okay, so in here, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create an account. So we're just going to get that response, first of all, and then we're going to call await account.create. So that's it. That's the method to create an account. Now we just need to pass in credentials here, and we can't just pass in our user credentials because we also need to generate a user ID. And Appwrite actually has this method for us called ID. So let's just try to import that. So we'll just do ID, and this should be from Appwrite. I guess it's, oh, it is autofilling. So I'll just go all the way down here. So it's ID from Appwrite. So we're just going to use this method, and that has to be the first parameter inside of create. So let's go ahead and actually just indent this, and we'll just do id.unique. So that's going to create a uniformed Appwrite ID. So you can create your own, but this way it's just going to stick to how Appwrite creates IDs. So we'll let Appwrite actually take care of that. So that's going to create our user ID. After that, we'll just do user info, and then we'll do .email, and then user info, and I believe we just want the name next. Give me 1 second. Let me just see my reference here. So then we want the password. So we'll just do user info .password 1, and we'll do user info .name. I believe that should be it. Okay, so let's just try to create a user. We'll jump in. Oh, after that, actually, before we finish this, what I want to do is actually log in a user right away. So after we do this, we just want to go ahead and get our account details. So we're going to create the session right after and then log our user in. So we can actually go into the login user method. And what I'm going to do is actually go ahead and create this email session and then get this account detail. Let's actually remove this. Let's just take this entire code block and bring this here. So if everything works and we created the account successfully, then we want to go ahead and create an email session. We'll take password 1, and at this point we're just going to log in with password 1. So we're going to log in with password 1, and then we can redirect our user. So let's go into our Appwrite account. Let's see, let response, await what's happening here. Identifier has already been used. Okay, let's see. I guess what I can do is I don't actually need this response because I use that twice. Okay, so we'll go into our Appwrite account. Let's go into auth and let's see all our sessions. So in here, we only see one user. So we want to go ahead and just make sure that our user actually gets registered. So once we try to log in, we'll just double check and make sure everything appears here. So I did notice one thing though. I realized that when we try to log in our user, we need to make sure we redirect our user to the homepage here. So on our login page, we check this right here. We check if a user is supposed to be here. So I guess what we could do actually is go ahead and just add this same logic to our register page because we want to be redirected right away. So we'll just bring this in right here and we'll bring in use navigate. So import use navigate, not user, but use navigate from React router. And we'll just set this up. So let's grab navigate and let's just set this up before we test this here. Okay, so if the user is here, we redirect him. I guess at this point we could just go ahead and now bring in the user to the register page. Okay, so now when we log in, when the state gets updated, we update the account details, which means a user should be redirected away from this page. So let's try this. Let's go ahead and just see what's going on. Let's inspect. Something didn't work. I'm assuming I'm probably missing an import. So use effect is not defined. I knew I'd do something like that. So we can bring in use effect. And we should be back to our homepage. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and try this. We only have one user, so we'll create James Bob. I like that as a YouTube channel name. So James at email.com. Password 123. Password 123. So we'll make sure they match this time. And let's just see this. Log in. There we go. We are logged in and registered, logged in and redirected. So if we go back to our console, here we go. We are in here. We see James Bob. So we are done with the tutorial. Let's see. I think we completed everything else and we have what we need. So we completed the full auth cycle. So congratulations if you got this far. Thank you for watching this tutorial, and make sure to give Appwrite a test. Try to use out their database feature. I would highly recommend watching that tutorial that I have on Traversing Media. Again, real-time functionality. We go through all the CRUD operations and so on. So a lot to do there, and I'm pretty sure I'll be coming out with a lot more Appwrite tutorials. So I'll see you all in another video.